Okay, hello everybody. This is a re-record of Monday night session, and I apparently didn't record it properly. So this is essentially what I presented. This is a really long chapter, and it's pretty challenging. We've been reviewing the Pope's Laudato Si in hopes of continued inspiration towards finding solutions for our ailing planet. And in the first two sessions, I hope you'll agree that he's done a beautiful job of explaining the gospel of creation, the human roots of the ecological crisis, and then what an integral ecology should look like. For many centuries, Christianity has misperceived nature and our place in it. This was in reaction to cults of paganism, shamanism, animism, pantheism. He's doing something revolutionary with Laudato Si. He's offering care for God's creation as something fundamental to spirituality. He's recognizing that love of nature is not in opposition to Christianity. He's recognizing God's creation for what it is, an incredible gift that we were given responsibility for. So in this perilous period of history, I hope that we can somehow accept his encyclical as second only to the Gospels, and therefore review it regularly as part of our spiritual journey. So let's begin with a prayer. Loving God, creator of heaven and earth and all that is in them, help us to be conscious that our common home belongs not only to us, but to all future generations, and that it is our responsibility to preserve it. Make us courageous to embrace the changes that are needed in search of the common good. So this is, like I said, a long channel. There's a chapter. There's a lot to cover. I'm going to have to go quickly, and please excuse me that most of the time I just have to read the slide. Here is his introductory paragraph to this important chapter 6. Many things have to change course, but it is we human beings above all who need to change. We lack an awareness of our common origin, of our mutual belonging, and of a future to be shared with everyone. This basic awareness would enable the development of new convictions, attitudes, and forms of life. A great cultural, spiritual, and educational challenge stands before us, and it will demand that we set out on the long path of renewal. So he begins, since the market tends to promote extreme consumerism in an effort to sell its products, people can easily get caught up in a whirlwind of needless buying and spending. Compulsive consumerism is one example of how the techno-economic paradigm affects individuals. Man is convinced that his conformity is both reasonable and just. This leads people to believe that they're free as long as they have the supposed freedom to consume. But those really free are the minority who wield economic and financial power. Amid this confusion, postmodern humanity has not yet achieved a new self-awareness capable of offering guidance and direction. And this lack of identity is a source of anxiety. We have too many means and only a few insubstantial ends. The current global situation engenders a feeling of instability and uncertainty, which in turn becomes a seedbed of collective selfishness. When people become self-centered and self-enclosed, their greed increases. The emptier a person's heart is, the more he or she needs things to buy, own, and consume. It becomes almost impossible to accept the limits imposed by reality. In this horizon, a genuine sense of the common good also disappears. As these attitudes become more widespread, social norms are respected only to the extent that they do not clash with personal needs. So our concern cannot be limited merely to the threat of extreme weather events, but must also extend to the catastrophic consequences of social unrest. Obsession with a consumerist lifestyle, above all when few people are capable of maintaining it, can only lead to violence and mutual destruction. Yet all is not lost. Human beings, while capable of the worst, are also capable of rising above themselves, choosing again what is good and making a new start, despite their mental and social conditioning. We are able to take an honest look at ourselves, to acknowledge our deep dissatisfaction, and to embark on new paths to authentic freedom. No system can completely suppress our openness to what is good, true, and beautiful, or our God-given ability to respond to His grace at work deep in our hearts. I appeal to everyone throughout the world not to forget this dignity which is ours. No one has the right to take it from us. So a change in lifestyle could bring healthy pressure on those who wield political, economic, and social power. This is what consumer movements accomplish by boycotting certain products. They prove successful in changing the way businesses operate, forcing them to consider their environmental footprint and their patterns of production. Purchasing is always a moral and not simply economic act. You can read about the Earth Charter on Google. The Pope says the Earth Charter asks us to leave behind a period of self-destruction and make a new start. As never before in history, common destiny beckons us to seek a new beginning. Let ours be a time remembered for the awakening of a new reverence for life. The firm resolve to achieve sustainability, the quickening of the struggle for justice and peace, and the joyful celebration of life. We are always capable of going out of ourselves towards the other. And unless we do this, other creatures will not be recognized for their true worth. Concern for others and the rejection of every form of self-centeredness and self-absorption are essential if we are truly wish to care for our brothers and sisters and for the natural environment. These attitudes also attune us to the moral imperative of assessing the impact of our every action and personal decision on the world around us. If we can overcome individualism, we will truly be able to develop a different lifestyle and bring about significant changes in society. So educating for the covenant between humanity and the environment, amassing of things and pleasures are not enough to give meaning and joy to the human heart. They just don't do it. Young people have a new ecological sensitivity and a generous spirit, and some of them are making admirable efforts to protect the environment. We're faced with an educational challenge in a milieu of extreme consumerism and affluence, which makes it difficult to develop other habits. Environmental education should facilitate making the leap towards the transcendent, which gives ecological ethics its deepest meaning. It needs educators capable of developing an ethics of ecology and helping people through effective teaching to grow in solidarity, responsibility, and compassionate care. We have to get rid of the utilitarian mindset myths of individualism, unlimited progress, competition, consumerism, and the unregulated market. And we need to restore ecological equilibrium by establishing harmony within ourselves, with others, with nature, with other living creatures, and with God. If education, laws, and regulations are to succeed, the members of society must be adequately motivated to accept them and personally transformed to respond by cultivating sound virtues, such as avoiding the use of plastic and paper, reducing water consumption, separating refuse, cooking only what can reasonably be consumed, showing care for other living beings, using public transport or carpooling, planting trees, turning off unnecessary lights, or any number of other practices. These efforts call forth a goodness which, albeit unseen, inevitably tends to spread. These efforts can restore self-esteem and enable us to live more fully and feel that life is worthwhile. So the Pope stresses ecological education on all levels, but particularly in families. He says, I would stress the great importance of the family, which is the place in which life, the gift of God, can be properly welcomed and protected against the many attacks which it is exposed. In the family, we first learn how to show love and respect for life. We are taught the proper use of things, order and cleanliness, respect for the local ecosystem, and care for all creatures. In the family, we receive an integral education, which enables us to grow harmoniously in personal maturity. In the family, we learn to ask without demanding, to say thank you as an expression of genuine gratitude for what we have been given, to control our aggressivity and greed, and to ask forgiveness when we have caused harm. These simple gestures of heartfelt courtesy help to create a culture of shared life and respect for our surroundings. Political institutions and various other social groups are also entrusted with helping to raise people's awareness. So too is the church. In seminaries, houses of formation, they teach responsible simplicity of life, in grateful contemplation of God's world, and in concern for the needs of the poor and the protection of the environment, self-control and willingness to learn. If someone has not learned to stop and admire something beautiful, we should not be surprised if he or she treats everything as an object to be used or abused without scruple. Certain mindsets really do influence our behavior. Efforts at education will be inadequate and ineffectual unless we strive to promote a new way of thinking about human beings, life, society, and our relationship with nature. The rich heritage of Christian spirituality, 20 centuries of personal and communal experience, has a precious contribution to make to the renewal of humanity. I am interested in how such a spirituality can motivate us to a more passionate concern for the protection of the world. A commitment this lofty cannot be sustained by doctrine alone. Without a spirituality capable of inspiring us, without an interior impulse which encourages, motivates, nourishes, and gives meaning to our individual and communal activity. Christians have not always appropriated and developed the spiritual treasures bestowed by God upon the church. And this has, of course, been the failing because we were afraid of paganism and animism in centuries past. So we didn't give nature its due. But the life of the spirit is not disassociated from the body or from nature or from worldly realities, but lived in and with them in communion with all that surrounds us. A profound interior conversion involves the internal deserts of the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. I have this picture of the globe, and these will be, the red will be uninhabitable areas by late this century, by 2070, if we don't do something about the way we're treating our planet. It must be said that some committed and prayerful Christians, with the excuse of realism and pragmatism, tend to ridicule expressions of concern for the environment. Others are passive. They choose not to change their habits and thus become inconsistent. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It is not an optional or secondary aspect of our Christian experience. So what we all need is an ecological conversion, whereby the effects of our encounter with Jesus Christ becomes evident in our relationship with the world around us. One dimension of overall personal conversion entails the recognition of our errors, sins, faults, and failures, and leads to heartfelt repentance and desire to change. I found this particularly striking, that I could go to confession and admit the things I have done that have harmed the planet over the years. To achieve such reconciliation, we must examine our lives and acknowledge the ways in which we have harmed God's creation through our actions and our failure to act. We need to experience a conversion or a change of heart. The ecological conversion needed to bring about lasting change is also a community conversion on Zoom groups, in community meetings, so forth. Social problems must be addressed by community networks. Oops, didn't mean to go forward yet. Social problems must be addressed by community networks. This task will take such tremendous demands of man that he could never achieve it by individual initiative or even by the unified effort of men bred in an individualistic way. First, it entails gratitude and gratuitousness, a recognition that the world is God's loving gift. It also entails a loving awareness that we are not disconnected from the rest of creatures, but joined in a splendid universal communion, conscious of the bonds with which the Father has linked us to all beings. An ecological conversion that can inspire us to greater creativity, such as vertical farming in our cities, and enthusiasm in resolving the world's problems and in offering ourselves to God as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable. So we are superior in nature, but we can't understand our superiority as a reason for personal glory or irresponsible dominion, but rather as a different capacity, which in its turn entails a serious responsibility stemming from our faith. Earlier in Laudato Si, we learned awareness that each creature reflects something of God and has a message to convey to us, and the security that Christ has taken unto himself this material world and now, risen, is intimately present in each being, surrounding it in his affection and penetrating it with his light. God created the world, writing into it an order and a dynamism that human beings have no right to ignore. Jesus says of the birds of the air that not one of them is forgotten before God. I ask all Christians to recognize and to live fully this dimension of their conversion. In this next chapter, Joy and Peace, the Pope talks about being happy with little. And there is a course, a 5-week course that you can take to kind of more fully live Laudato Si, and it's recommended here. This is where the Pope talks about an alternative understanding of the quality of life and encourages a prophetic and contemplative lifestyle, one capable of deep enjoyment, free of the obsession of consumption, to be serenely present to each reality, however small it may be. The constant flood of new consumer goods can baffle the heart and prevent us from cherishing each thing in each moment. This implies avoiding the dynamic of dominion and the mere accumulation of pleasures. What it means to appreciate each person and each thing with learning familiarity with the simplest things and how to enjoy them. To shed unsatisfied needs, reducing their obsessiveness and weariness. To cultivate other pleasures and find satisfaction in fraternal encounters, in service, in developing their gifts, in music and art, in contact with nature, in prayer. Sobriety and humility were not favorably regarded in the last century. When there's a general breakdown in the exercise of a certain virtue in personal and social life, it ends up causing a number of imbalances, including environmental ones. Once we lose our humility and become enthralled with the possibility of limitless mastery over everything, we inevitably end up harming society and the environment. It's not easy to promote this kind of healthy humility or happy sobriety when we consider ourselves autonomous, when we exclude God from our lives and replace him with our own ego, and think that our subjective feelings can define what is right and wrong. No one can cultivate a sober and satisfying life without being at peace with him or herself. Inner peace is closely related to care for ecology and for the common good because lived out authentically, it is reflected in a balanced lifestyle together with a capacity for wonder, which takes us to a deeper understanding of life. I recently watched another beautiful David Attenborough documentary, A Life on Our Planet, on Netflix. He maps out how steeply the planet's biodiversity has degenerated during his 60-year career. I highly recommend all of his documentaries to help renew your love for our planet, but particularly this one at this perilous time. I do think that these documentaries can really bring us closer to knowing where we're at and where we need to be. An attitude of the heart, one which approaches life with serene attentiveness and is capable of being fully present to someone without thinking of what comes next, and which accepts each moment as a gift from God to be lived to the full. It's an important key for joy and peace. Jesus taught us this attitude when he invited us to contemplate the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, or when seeing the rich young man and knowing his restlessness, he looked at him with love. He was completely present to everyone and to everything, and in this way, he showed us the way to overcome that unhealthy anxiety which makes us superficial, aggressive, and compulsive consumers. One expression of this attitude is when we stop and give thanks to God before and after meals. I ask all believers to return to this beautiful, meaningful custom. That moment of blessing, however brief, reminds us of our dependence on God for life. It strengthens our feeling of gratitude for the gifts of creation. It acknowledges those who by their labors provide us with these goods, and it reaffirms our solidarity with those in greatest need. Care of nature is the capacity of living together and communion. We have God as our common Father, and that this makes us brothers and sisters. We must regain the conviction that we need one another, that we have a shared responsibility for others and the world, and that being good and decent are worth it. You know, Justice Matters here in Lawrence is such a wonderful example of this. Without this, what ensues are battles over conflicting interests, new forms of violence and brutality, and obstacles to the growth of a genuine culture of care for the environment. An integral ecology is also made up of simple daily gestures which break with the logic of violence, exploitation, and selfishness. Small gestures of mutual care is also civic and political, and it makes itself felt in every action that seeks to build a better world. The Church set before the world the ideal of a civilization of love. Social love moves us to devise larger strategies to halt environmental degradation and to encourage a culture of care, which permeates all of society. When we feel God is calling us to intervene with others in these social dynamics, we should realize that this too is part of our spirituality. But not everyone is called to engage directly in political life. Some show concern for a public place, a building, a fountain, an abandoned monument, a landscape, a square, to strive to protect, restore, improve, or beautify it as something belonging to everyone. Thus, a community can break out of the indifference induced by consumerism. These community actions, when they express self-giving love, can also become intense spiritual experiences. Saint Bonaventure teaches us that contemplation deepens the more we feel the working of God's grace within our hearts, and the better we learn to encounter God in creatures outside ourselves. The universe unfolds in God who fills it completely. Hence, there is a mystical meaning to be found in a leaf, in a mountain trail, in a dewdrop, in a poor person's face, The ideal is not only to pass from the exterior to the interior to discover the action of God in the soul, but also to discover God in all things. St. John of the Cross taught us that all the goodness present in the realities and experiences of this world, in each of these sublime realities, is God. This is not because the finite things of this world are really divine, but because the mystic experiences the intimate connection between God and all beings, and thus feels that all things are God. Through our worship of God, we're invited to embrace the world on a different plane. Here in chapter 6, section 6, this is especially clear in the spirituality of the Christian East. Beauty is one of the best loved names expressing the divine harmony and the model of humanity transfigured. For Christians, all the creatures of the material universe find their true meaning in the incarnate Word. For the Son of God has incorporated in his person part of the material world, planting in it a seed of definitive transformation. Christianity does not reject matter. Rather, bodiliness is considered in all its value in the liturgical act, whereby the human body is disclosed in its inner nature as a temple of the Holy Spirit and is united with the Lord Jesus, who himself took a body for the world's salvation. It is the Eucharist that all that has been created finds its greatest exaltation. Grace, which tends to manifest itself tangibly, found unsurpassable expression when God himself became man and gave himself as food for his creatures. He comes that we might find him in this world of ours. The Eucharist joins heaven and earth. It embraces and penetrates all creation. In the bread of the Eucharist, creation is projected towards divinization, towards the holy wedding feast, towards unification of the Creator himself. We tend to demean contemplative rest as something unproductive and unnecessary, but this is to do away with the very thing which is most important about work, its meaning. On Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has special importance. Rest protects human action from becoming empty activism. It also prevents that unfettered greed and sense of isolation, which make us seek personal gain to the detriment of all else. Rest opens our eyes to the larger picture and gives us renewed sensitivity to the rights of others and motivates us to greater concern for nature and the poor. Chapter 7. These final short 3 chapters will move us to the conclusion of Laudato Si. The Father is the ultimate source of everything, the loving and self-communicating foundation of all that exists. The Son, his reflection, through whom all things were created, united himself to this earth when he was formed in the womb of Mary. The Spirit, infinite bond of love, is intimately present at the very heart of the universe, inspiring and bringing new pathways. The world was created by the 3 persons acting as a single divine principle, but each one of them performed this common work in accordance with his own personal property. Consequently, when we contemplate the wonder of the universe in all its grandeur and beauty, we must praise the whole Trinity. Saint Bonaventure went so far as to say that human beings, before sin, were able to see how each creature testifies that God is 3. The reflection of the Trinity was there to be recognized in nature when the book was opened to man and our eyes had not yet become darkened. Creatures tend towards God, and in turn, it is proper that every living being tend towards other things. The human person grows more, matures more, and is sanctified more to the extent that he or she enters into relationships, going out from themselves to live in communion with God, with others and with all creatures. Just as her pierced heart mourned the death of Jesus, so now she grieves for the sufferings of the crucified poor and for the creatures of this world laid waste by human power. Hence, we can ask her to enable us to look at this world with eyes of wisdom. The gospel presents Joseph as a just man, hardworking and strong, but he also shows great tenderness, which is not a mark of the weak, but of those who are genuinely strong, fully aware of reality, and ready to love and serve in humility. He too can teach us how to show care. He can inspire us to work with generosity and tenderness in protecting this world which God has entrusted to us. The final chapter, at the end, we will find ourselves face to face with the infinite beauty of God. Even now, we are journeying towards the Sabbath of eternity, the New Jerusalem, towards our common home in heaven. Eternal life will be a shared experience of awe, in which each creature, resplendently transfigured, will take its rightful place and have something to give those poor men and women who will have been liberated once and for all. In the meantime, we come together to take charge of this home, which has been entrusted to us, knowing that all the good which exists here will be taken up into the heavenly feast. For if the world has a beginning, and if it has been created, we must inquire who gave it this beginning, and who was its creator. Let us sing as we go. May our struggles and our concern for this planet never take away the joy of our hope. God, who calls us to generous commitment, to give him our all, offers us the light and the strength needed to continue on our way. In the heart of this world, the Lord of life, who loves us so much, is always present. He does not abandon us. He does not leave us alone, for he has united himself definitively to the earth, and his love constantly impels us to find new ways forward. Praise be to him. And then the Pope gives us this wonderful prayer, which I highly recommend, as I highly recommend getting a copy of Laudato Si or downloading it online. At the end of Laudato Si is this beautiful prayer. I'm not going to read it because I read enough, but I do highly recommend it. And then on our meeting Monday night, we had a discussion following of these questions for the final half hour, and kind of went back and reviewed some of the slides so that we could touch on some of the chapters that were covered and further understand them. And we particularly concentrated on how we can go about an ecological conversion. And I thought that was a great discussion. I encourage you to ponder these questions a bit, and maybe we can touch on them next Monday night at our meeting. So till then, God bless, and thank you very much for joining.